Your numbers just aren't cutting it anymore, Adrian, Director Patterson said, barely looking up from his laptop as he slid the termination letter across his mahogany desk. We need people who can adapt to our new metrics. What he didn't mention was that I had just closed the biggest deal in the company's history 3 days earlier. Little did he know, by firing me, he had just made the biggest mistake of his career, one that would cost his company millions and destroy everything he thought he'd built. My name is Adrian Torres, 38 years old, and for the past 7 years I've been the Senior Sales Director at Vanguard Tech Solutions in Denver, Colorado. While my colleagues struggled to hit their quarterly targets, I consistently brought in 35% of our entire revenue stream. That's $8.75 million out of our $25 million annual revenue. Not through luck or connections, but through pure grinding, 12-hour days, weekend client calls, and a contact list I'd built from scratch. I'd joined Vanguard when it was still operating out of a cramped office above a sandwich shop, back when CEO Diana Walsh was personally answering phones, and we had maybe 15 employees total. She hired me away from a Fortune 500 competitor, promising me the chance to build something meaningful from the ground up. I need someone who thinks like an owner, she'd said during my interview. Someone who treats every client like their business depends on it. For 7 years, that's exactly what I did. I transformed our client relationships from simple vendor agreements into strategic partnerships. My accounts included tech startups that had grown into unicorns, established firms looking to modernize, and everything in between. When other salespeople closed 1-year contracts, I negotiated 3- and 5-year deals. When they offered standard packages, I created custom solutions that commanded premium pricing. The results spoke for themselves. Vanguard had grown from a $2 million startup to a $25 million enterprise, and my portfolio was responsible for $8.75 million of that annual revenue. I'd built something I was genuinely proud of. Not just numbers on a spreadsheet, but real relationships with people who trusted me to solve their problems. But apparently, none of that mattered to Director Patterson, who'd arrived 6 months ago with his MBA jargon and disruptive strategies. Tomorrow, he was about to learn exactly what happens when you mistake your top performer for dead weight. I should have seen it coming, but success has a way of making you comfortable. Director Patterson had been brought in by the board 6 months earlier as our Chief Growth Officer, a title that should have been my first red flag. He came from a consulting firm in Silicon Valley, armed with PowerPoint presentations about scalable methodologies and performance optimization. Within his first month, Patterson had implemented new tracking systems that measured everything except what actually mattered. Cold calls per day, emails sent, meetings scheduled, metrics that favored quantity over the quality relationships I'd spent years building. My numbers looked terrible on his dashboards because I wasn't making 50 random calls a day. Instead, I was having strategic conversations with decision-makers who could write 7-figure checks. The warning sign started small. My assistant Emma was reassigned to support the broader team. My corner office was needed for collaborative workspace optimization. Client dinners required pre-approval from Patterson himself, who questioned every expense despite the ROI being obvious to anyone who understood the business. 3 weeks ago, Patterson hired his former colleague Tyler Brooks as Strategic Account Director, a position that had never existed before. Tyler was 28, fresh from business school, and spoke fluent corporate buzzword. During his first week, Patterson assigned him to shadow me on calls with my biggest clients, including Nexus Industries, my crown jewel account worth $2.8 million annually. After one particularly successful meeting where we expanded Nexus's contract by 40%, Tyler pulled me aside. "I've been thinking about ways to streamline your process," he said with the confidence only someone with zero experience could muster. "Maybe we could automate some of these relationship touch points." That's when it hit me. They weren't trying to learn from me. They were studying me, documenting my methods, mapping my relationships. I was being reverse engineered so they could replicate my success without actually paying for it. The final insult came yesterday morning. Patterson called me into his office with Diana Walsh, our CEO, sitting silently in the corner like a reluctant witness to an execution. "We're restructuring the sales team," he announced. "Your approach, while successful in the past, Doesn't align with our scalable growth model. Scalable growth model. 7 years of record-breaking performance dismissed with a buzzword. Looking back, the signs had been building for months, like cracks in a foundation that you notice only after the house starts falling down. It began with Patterson's obsession with our sales methodology documentation. He'd scheduled mandatory sessions where I had to explain my client acquisition process, my relationship management strategies, even my follow-up schedules. We need to create replicable systems, he'd explained during one of these sessions, typing furiously on his laptop while I walked him through how I'd landed the Sterling Group account. What works for you should work for everyone. But that wasn't how relationships worked. When Nathan Sterling called me at 11 p.m. because his company was facing a crisis and needed solutions by morning, that wasn't a system. That was 7 years of trust. When Victoria Martinez from Pinnacle Manufacturing invited me to her daughter's graduation because I'd helped save her startup during the pandemic, that wasn't methodology. That was genuine human connection. Patterson didn't understand this, and honestly, I don't think he wanted to. He was building a case, collecting evidence to support a decision that had already been made. The mandatory weekly one-on-ones where he questioned every client interaction. The new CRM system that tracked my communications and flagged inefficiencies in my approach. The sudden requirement that all client proposals needed his approval before sending. The breaking point came when he assigned Tyler to join my call with Isabella Chen, CEO of Flowtech Industries, my longest-standing client and friend. Isabella had been with me since my second year at Vanguard, back when her company was a small operation, and I was still proving myself. We'd grown together, weathered economic downturns, celebrated expansions. During the call, Tyler interrupted Isabella mid-sentence to pitch a more comprehensive solution that would cost 60% more than what she actually needed. The silence that followed was deafening. After we hung up, Isabella texted me privately. "Who was that kid, Adrian? And why did he just try to sell me a Lamborghini when I came in for an oil change?" I should have known then that Patterson wasn't just restructuring. He was preparing to replace me entirely. I sat in my car in the Vanguard Tech parking garage for 20 minutes after the termination meeting, not because I was devastated, but because I was processing something I'd never felt before, complete clarity. The anger I expected never came. Instead, there was this strange sense of relief, like waking up from a dream where you're trying to run but your legs won't work. My phone buzzed with a text from Victoria Martinez. "Heard through the grapevine that something happened at Vanguard. You okay?" News traveled fast in our industry, especially when it involved someone who'd been around as long as I had. I set the phone aside without responding. I needed to think before I said anything to anyone. Driving home through downtown Denver, I found myself actually smiling. Not because I was happy about being fired, no one enjoys that, but because for the first time in months I felt like myself again. No more Patterson breathing down my neck, questioning every decision. No more explaining why relationship building takes time to someone who measured success in daily activity reports. My wife Carmen was working from home when I walked in at 2 p.m., 3 hours earlier than usual. She looked up from her laptop with concern. "Everything okay? You look different." "Patterson fired me," I said, and then something weird happened. I started laughing. Not bitter laughter, but genuine amusement at the absurdity of it all. Carmen's face went through a series of expressions: shock, anger, worry, before settling on confusion. "Why are you laughing?" "Because he has no idea what he just did," I said, loosening my tie and sitting down next to her. "Patterson thinks he fired an underperforming employee. What he actually did was cut Vanguard off from $8.75 million in annual revenue, and he doesn't even know it yet." I pulled out my personal phone and scrolled through my contacts. 7 years of relationship building, hundreds of genuine connections, clients who trusted me personally, not just professionally. Phone numbers, email addresses, birthdays, kids' names, business challenges, growth plans, all stored right here in my personal device, not in Vanguard's CRM system. Patterson could have Tyler. He could have his metrics and his scalable methodologies, but what he couldn't replicate was trust. That evening, I did something I'd never done before. I opened a bottle of wine and went through my personal contacts systematically, not to make calls, but to truly understand what I'd built over 7 years. What I discovered was staggering. My personal phone contained direct cell numbers for 127 decision-makers, not just business cards collected at conferences, but people who'd given me their personal numbers because our relationships had evolved beyond vendor-client transactions. CEOs who'd invited me to their kids' weddings, CFOs who'd called me for advice on deals that had nothing to do with Vanguard, entrepreneurs who'd become genuine friends. More importantly, I realized that my value to these clients wasn't Vanguard Tech Solutions. It was Adrian Torres. When Nexus Industries needed emergency server migration last Christmas Eve, Benjamin Kim didn't call Vanguard's main number. He called me directly. When Flowtech was considering going public and needed to overhaul their entire digital infrastructure, Isabella Chen didn't request Vanguard's best consultant. She specifically requested me. I pulled up my personal calendar and counted. In the past 12 months, I'd received 43 referrals from existing clients, new business that came to Vanguard because someone trusted me enough to stake their reputation on my recommendation. These weren't leads generated by marketing campaigns or cold calling strategies. They were relationships vouching for relationships. The financial reality was even more eye-opening. Of my $8.75 million portfolio, only about $1.5 million came from clients I'd inherited when I joined Vanguard. The other $7.25 million represented businesses I'd brought in personally, relationships I'd cultivated, trust I'd earned. Patterson's scalable methodologies had contributed exactly $0 to Vanguard's bottom line. I thought about Tyler, sitting in some hotel room right now, probably studying my client files and trying to figure out how to streamline the relationship touchpoints. He could memorize every proposal I'd ever written, but he couldn't replicate 7 years of showing up. He couldn't automate the time I spent 3 hours on the phone with a client's IT director, walking through a complex integration issue. He couldn't systemize the dinner where I listened to a CEO talk about his father's battle with cancer, which had nothing to do with business but everything to do with why he trusted me with his company's future. Patterson had just handed me the keys to his kingdom, and he didn't even know it. I made myself a promise that night. No matter how tempting it became, I wouldn't make a single vengeful move. No angry LinkedIn posts, no bitter emails to former colleagues, no immediate calls to clients trash-talking Vanguard. This was going to be handled with the same professionalism I'd maintained for 7 years. The first test came at 7 a.m. the next morning when my phone started buzzing. Victoria Martinez was calling, and I knew she'd heard the news through industry channels. I let it go to voicemail. Then Benjamin Kim from Nexus Industries called. Voicemail. Then 3 more clients within the span of an hour. Instead of answering, I drove to a coffee shop downtown and spent the morning crafting a single, carefully worded message that I would send to my key clients later in the day. No drama, no explanations, just facts delivered with the same reliability they'd come to expect from me over the years. Effective immediately, I am no longer with Vanguard Tech Solutions. This transition was not my choice, but I want you to hear it directly from me before you hear it elsewhere. I'm exploring my next steps and will keep you informed as things develop. Thank you for 7 years of partnership and trust. That was it. No accusations, no behind-the-scenes details, no emotional manipulation. Just information, delivered the same way I'd delivered everything else in our professional relationships. Straight, honest, and respectful. By 2 p.m., I'd sent this message to 18 key clients representing about $6.8 million in annual contracts. Then I turned off my phone and went for a long walk with Carmen through Washington Park. We talked about everything except work, our upcoming anniversary, her new photography project, whether we should finally take that trip to New Zealand we'd been postponing for 3 years. "You seem remarkably calm for someone who just lost their job," she observed, as we sat by the lake watching kayakers navigate the afternoon current. "That's because I didn't lose my job," I said. "I lost my employer. There's a difference." When I finally turned my phone back on at 6 p.m., I had 23 missed calls and 47 text messages. The responses to my simple announcement had been immediate and telling, but I didn't call anyone back that night. Strategic patience was about to become Patterson's worst nightmare. I didn't have to wait long to see the first cracks in Patterson's master plan. My phone rang at 8:30 a.m. the next morning. Diana Walsh, Vanguard's CEO, calling from her personal number. "Adrian, we need to talk," she said, her voice tight with stress. "Several clients are asking about your departure. Benjamin Kim wants to know who's taking over his account, and he doesn't sound happy." "I imagine he wouldn't be," I replied calmly. "Nexus Industries has been with me for 6 years. Transitions like this can be challenging. Can you come in today? Maybe help with the handover process?" "I don't think that would be appropriate, Diana. Patterson made it clear that my approach doesn't align with Vanguard's new direction. It would be confusing to involve me in client transitions." After we hung up, I checked my messages. Victoria Martinez had texted, "Got your message." Vanguard just called to schedule a relationship continuity meeting with Tyler. Told them I'd think about it. By noon, I'd received similar messages from 6 other major clients. Vanguard was in full damage control mode, trying to schedule emergency meetings to reassure clients that the transition would be seamless. But the responses they were getting told a different story. Isabella Chen from Flowtech was more direct in her text. Tyler called to introduce himself as my new strategic account director. Asked if I was satisfied with your service level and whether I'd be open to exploring enhanced solutions. I told him I was perfectly satisfied and hung up. The avalanche had started with just a few pebbles. Sterling Group requested an immediate contract review meeting. Pinnacle Manufacturing asked about early termination clauses. 3 smaller clients sent formal letters requesting clarification about account management changes. Patterson clearly hadn't anticipated this level of client concern. His scalable methodology apparently didn't include a playbook for what happens when your top performer's departure creates an industry-wide ripple effect. By late afternoon, my phone was buzzing with calls from competitors. Word travels fast in Denver's tech scene, and everyone knew that Adrian Torres was suddenly available. But I wasn't ready to take those calls yet. I had something else in mind. Something that would make Patterson's next few weeks very, very interesting. The best part? I still hadn't done anything except send one honest message to my clients. Everything that was happening to Vanguard was happening naturally, as the logical consequence of their decision to fire the person who'd built their most valuable relationships. 3 days after my termination, I got a call that changed everything. It was from my former assistant, Emma, calling from her personal phone during her lunch break. "Adrian, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice hushed like she was worried about being overheard. "What Patterson did to you, it wasn't just about performance metrics or scalable methodologies. There's something else going on." She explained that she'd been asked to compile detailed reports on all of my client relationships over the past 6 months. Not just account summaries, but personal information. Birthdays I remembered, family details I'd mentioned in conversations, even the specific restaurants where I'd taken clients to dinner. Patterson had been building a comprehensive database of my relationship management approach. "But that's not the worst part," Emma continued. "Last week I saw an email Patterson sent to Diana. They've been in talks with Horizon Capital about a potential acquisition. Patterson told them that Vanguard's client relationships were institutionalized and not dependent on individual sales staff." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Patterson hadn't fired me because I was underperforming. He'd fired me to prove to potential buyers that Vanguard's revenue streams were stable and transferable. My termination was a demonstration, a way to show that the company could maintain its client base even without its top performer. "There's more," Emma said. "Tyler isn't just Patterson's former colleague. He's from Horizon Capital. He's been documenting everything, studying your methods so they can replicate them after the acquisition." I felt my careful composure crack for the first time since the termination meeting. This wasn't just corporate politics or a personality clash. This was a calculated betrayal designed to strip away 7 years of my work and package it as a corporate asset for sale. Patterson actually said in the email that firing you would prove Vanguard had systematized its client relationships, Emma added. He called it the Adrian Torres stress test. After we hung up, I sat in my home office staring out at the Denver skyline, processing the full scope of what had been done to me. They hadn't just fired me. They'd tried to steal my professional identity and sell it to the highest bidder. But Patterson had made one critical miscalculation. He'd assumed that client relationships were just data points that could be transferred from one spreadsheet to another. He was about to learn how wrong he was. Armed with the truth about Patterson's scheme, I finally started returning calls from competitors. Word travels fast in Denver's tech scene, and everyone knew that Adrian Torres was suddenly available. But I wasn't ready to take those calls yet. I had something else in mind, something that would make Patterson's next few weeks very, very interesting. The best part? I still hadn't done anything except send one honest message to my clients. Everything that was happening to Vanguard was happening naturally, as the logical consequence of their decision to fire the person who'd built their most valuable relationships. 3 days after my termination, I got a call that changed everything. It was from my former assistant Emma, calling from her personal phone during her lunch break. "Adrian, I need to tell you something," she said. Her voice hushed like she was worried about being overheard. "What Patterson did to you, it wasn't just about performance metrics or scalable methodologies. There's something else going on." She explained that she'd been asked to compile detailed reports on all of my client relationships over the past 6 months. Not just account summaries, but personal information. Birthdays I remembered, family details I'd mentioned in conversations, even the specific restaurants where I'd taken clients to dinner. Patterson had been building a comprehensive database of my relationship management approach. "But that's not the worst part," Emma continued. "Last week, I saw an email Patterson sent to Diana. They've been in talks with Horizon Capital about a potential acquisition. Patterson told them that Vanguard's client relationships were institutionalized and not dependent on individual sales staff. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Patterson hadn't fired me because I was underperforming. He'd fired me to prove to potential buyers that Vanguard's revenue streams were stable and transferable. My termination was a demonstration, a way to show that the company could maintain its client base, even without its top performer. "There's more," Emma said. "Tyler isn't just Patterson's former colleague. He's from Horizon Capital. He's been documenting everything, studying your methods so they can replicate them after the acquisition." I felt my careful composure crack for the first time since the termination meeting. This wasn't just corporate politics or a personality clash. This was a calculated betrayal designed to strip away 7 years of my work and package it as a corporate asset for sale. "Patterson actually said in the email that firing you would prove Vanguard had systematized its client relationships," Emma added. "He called it the Adrian Torres stress test." After we hung up, I sat in my home office staring out at the Denver skyline, processing the full scope of what had been done to me. They hadn't just fired me. They'd tried to steal my professional identity and sell it to the highest bidder. But Patterson had made one critical miscalculation. He'd assumed that client relationships were just data points that could be transferred from one spreadsheet to another. He was about to learn how wrong he was. Armed with the truth about Patterson's scheme, I finally started returning calls from competitors. The first one I called back was Robert Santos, CEO of Summit Solutions, Vanguard's biggest rival in the Denver market. "Adrian, I was hoping you'd call," Robert said. "I heard about Vanguard, and frankly, I'm shocked. You're exactly the kind of person we build companies around, not fire from them." Within an hour, I was sitting in Summit's downtown office, and Robert was making me an offer that validated every suspicion I'd had about my true worth. Senior Vice President of Client Relations, equity partnership, and complete autonomy to manage my accounts however I saw fit. "I'm not just hiring a salesperson," Robert explained. "I'm investing in relationships that took years to build. Whatever clients follow you here, that's just a bonus. What I really want is someone who understands that trust is the only currency that matters in this business." I accepted on the spot, but with one condition. I wanted to make a statement at next week's Rocky Mountain Tech Conference, where Patterson was scheduled to present on modernizing client relationships in the digital age. Robert smiled when I explained my plan. "You want to give him a real-world case study," he said. "I love it." The conference was held at the Colorado Convention Center, and the industry turnout was massive. Patterson's presentation was scheduled for the main stage at 2 p.m., right after lunch when everyone would be alert and engaged. I registered as an attendee under Summit Solutions and took a seat in the third row. Patterson's presentation was everything I expected: polished slides about automation, predictive analytics, and systematic relationship management. He spoke confidently about how modern companies could eliminate dependency on individual relationship managers through technology. During the Q&A session, I stood up. The moment Patterson saw me, his face went pale. "Adrian Torres, now with Summit Solutions," I said into the wireless microphone. "Director Patterson, I'm curious about your experience implementing these systematic approaches. Can you share some specific results from your time at Vanguard Tech?" The room was dead silent. Everyone in Denver's tech community knew what had happened. My firing had been industry gossip for a week. Patterson stammered through a non-answer about ongoing implementations and proprietary metrics. Then I asked the question that ended his career. Specifically, I'm wondering about the retention rates when you eliminate dependency on individual relationship managers. In your Vanguard experience, how many major accounts have you successfully transitioned using these methods? Patterson couldn't answer my question because by that point, there was no good answer to give. In the weeks since my termination, Vanguard had lost 7 major accounts totaling $4.2 million in annual revenue. Nexus Industries had terminated their contract. Flowtech had declined to renew. Sterling Group had switched to Summit Solutions, specifically requesting me as their account manager. The industry was watching Vanguard's implosion in real time, and Patterson's conference presentation had become an unintentional case study in how not to manage client relationships. After the conference, word spread quickly about the public confrontation. By evening, Denver Business Journal had published an article titled, "Vanguard Tech Loses Major Clients Following Sales Director Dismissal." The piece included quotes from Victoria Martinez and Benjamin Kim, both explaining why they'd followed me to Summit Solutions. "Adrian Torres didn't just manage our account," Victoria told the reporter. "He understood our business, anticipated our needs, and became a trusted advisor. You can't automate that level of relationship building, and you certainly can't transfer it to someone else like a spreadsheet." The financial impact on Vanguard was devastating. Their stock price dropped 18% in 3 days. Diana Walsh was forced to call an emergency board meeting to address the client exodus. And Patterson? He submitted his resignation before he could be fired, citing strategic differences with the executive team. Tyler Brooks, the Horizon Capital consultant who'd been brought in to study my methods, quietly disappeared back to Silicon Valley. The acquisition talks with Horizon collapsed when they realized Vanguard's institutionalized client relationships were actually one person's career worth of trust and reputation. But the most satisfying moment came when Diana Walsh called me personally. "Adrian, I owe you an apology," she said. "I should have never let Patterson convince me that your approach was outdated. The board is asking if there's any way to make this right." "Diana, you gave Patterson permission to treat me like I was replaceable," I replied. "The market has now shown you exactly how replaceable I actually was. I appreciate the call, but I'm building something new now." Within 2 months, Summit Solutions had gained $6.8 million in new business, almost all from former Vanguard clients. We hired 4 new employees to handle the growth. I wasn't just back on my feet. I was thriving in ways I never could have at Vanguard. 6 months after Patterson fired me for underperforming, I signed the partnership agreement that made me a 25% owner of Summit Solutions. The company had grown by 40% since my arrival, and my client portfolio now represented $12 million in annual revenue, more than I'd ever managed at Vanguard. But the real transformation wasn't financial, it was personal. For the first time in years, I was working somewhere that valued relationships over metrics, trust over technology, and long-term thinking over quarterly pressures. Robert Santos had built Summit on the same principles I'd been trying to advocate at Vanguard for years. "You know what the difference is between us and Vanguard?" Robert asked during my partnership signing ceremony. "We understand that in a relationship business, the relationship is the business. Everything else is just infrastructure." I'd learned something profound from the whole experience. Being fired was the best thing that could have happened to me. It forced me out of a comfortable but limiting situation and into an environment where I could actually thrive. Patterson's betrayal had inadvertently freed me from a company that would never truly appreciate what I brought to the table. The final piece of closure came when I received a LinkedIn message from Tyler Brooks, the consultant who'd been brought in to study my methods. He'd landed at a small firm in Dallas and wanted to apologize for his role in Patterson's scheme. I thought relationship management was just a series of processes that could be documented and replicated, he wrote. Working with your former clients taught me that what you do isn't systematic, it's authentic. That's why it works. And it's why it can't be copied. A few weeks later, I got coffee with Diana Walsh. She looked tired, older than her years. Vanguard was struggling to rebuild after losing so much of their client base, and she was having to personally salvage relationships that had been damaged during Patterson's brief reign. "I keep thinking about what you said," she told me over espresso at a downtown cafe, "about how I gave Patterson permission to treat you like you were replaceable. I've been in business for 15 years and I've never made a more expensive mistake." "The mistake wasn't firing me, Diana," I said. "The mistake was not understanding what you had before it was gone. That's a lesson a lot of companies need to learn." As I walked back to my car, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in just 6 months. Better job, better partnership, better work-life balance, and the deep satisfaction that comes from being truly valued for your contributions. Patterson had thought he was conducting a stress test to prove that Vanguard could function without me. Instead, he'd conducted the ultimate validation of my career. 1 year to the day after Patterson slid those termination papers across his desk, I received an envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a newspaper clipping from the Denver Business Journal. Vanguard Tech Solutions acquired by Dallas firm for below-market valuation. The article detailed how Vanguard had never recovered from the client exodus following my departure. Revenue had dropped 35%, they'd had to lay off half their staff, and Diana Walsh had eventually been forced to sell to a competitor for a fraction of what the company had been worth just 18 months earlier. Patterson's grand plan to prove that Vanguard's relationships were institutionalized had spectacularly backfired. Instead of making the company more attractive to buyers, he'd stripped away its most valuable asset, the trust and loyalty that I'd spent 7 years building. But the real victory wasn't Vanguard's downfall. It was what I'd built at Summit Solutions. We just signed the largest contract in company history, a 5-year, $15 million deal with Nexus Industries to handle their digital transformation across all North American operations. Benjamin Kim had specifically requested that the contract include a clause ensuring that I would personally oversee the relationship for the duration of the agreement. "Adrian, you've taught us something important," Benjamin said during the contract signing. "In an age where everything is automated and impersonal, having someone who genuinely cares about our success is more valuable than any technology. That's not something you can systematize or replicate." That evening, Carmen and I celebrated my 1-year anniversary at Summit with dinner at the same restaurant where Robert Santos had first offered me the partnership. As we toasted with champagne, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. "You know what the craziest part is?" I told Carmen. Patterson genuinely believed he was making a smart business decision. He saw relationships as inefficiencies that needed to be optimized away. He never understood that in a service business, the relationship is the product. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma, my former assistant at Vanguard. She'd found a new job at a growing startup and wanted to share some news. "Thought you'd want to know. Patterson's LinkedIn says he's now a consultant working on strategic business optimization. Apparently, he's still trying to systematize things that can't be systematized." I showed the message to Carmen, and we both laughed. Some people never learn. As I looked around the restaurant at other business dinners happening around us, handshakes, conversations, relationships being built one interaction at a time, I realized that Patterson had done me the greatest favor of my career. He'd forced me out of a situation where I was undervalued and into one where I was truly appreciated. The best revenge, it turns out, isn't revenge at all. It's building something better and letting success speak for itself.